All right, let's explore this a bit more now. And for more on this, we're joined by Professor Christopher Gevers, who is an associate professor at the School of Law, director at the Center for Applied Studies. Prof, thank you so much for joining us this morning here on SABC News. We really do appreciate it. I think let's start first of all, with whether the legality of these strikes, international strikes, and the retaliation on that as well. Let's talk about the legality of both of those, the strikes and the retaliation.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Griselda. So I think it's very clear that the strike itself, the initial strike, is unlawful as a matter of international law. There is a right of self-defense under international law, but the right of self-defense is only in response to an armed attack. You cannot respond in what is called preventative self-defense. So essentially, the case outlined by the US and Israel is to say that there may be a threat posed in the future, and regardless of the factual accuracy of that assessment, that's not a basis to use force in the present. The only time you can act in self-defense is either if you are directly attacked or in anticipation of an immediate attack, right? So if the missiles are on their way or the attack is about to be launched, obviously you can act in anticipation, but you can't act in a preventive way. The same way that the war in Iraq was unlawful because it was premised on the idea that Saddam Hussein might at some point get weapons and might at some point pose a threat. So I think it's very clear, and that's the same could be said of the other justifications. So, for example, the justification that the people of Iran are being persecuted, which is absolutely true, it doesn't give you a right to use force in support of them. It also means that if you do that, bombing schools, for example, doesn't suggest that you are, in fact, acting in the interest of the people of Iran. So the attack itself is unlawful. There's no justification under self-defense. There's no justification under authorization from the Security Council. The response is in principle lawful because Iran is now being attacked and has a right of self-defense, but its response is not a blank check to use whatever force it wants. So its response must also be proportionate to the threat and necessary. And although the information coming out hasn't been confirmed, it seems like the response from Iran is to target any allies in the region that are seen as of supporting the US or Israel, and that sort of blanket response that particularly targets civilian infrastructure and so on would also be a violation of their right. It'd be an extension of their right of self-defense beyond lawful bounds. So they have a right to respond, but it must be both necessary to respond to the threat and proportionate to that threat.
And I mean, this definitely points to the direction that the negotiations that were held were certainly not held in good faith.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things, and I think the UN Secretary General was pointing to this, that there were ongoing, and he mentioned it was the third round, Oman was busy mediating. There was an ongoing diplomatic effort, as there has been for a number of years in respect of this issue. And aside from the fact that that's a waste of our energies diplomatically, it does undermine a principle of international law, which is that you must settle your disputes peacefully. And unfortunately, when you are negotiating on the one hand and then immediately bombing on another, it undermines sort of the good faith belief of the actors, but also the process itself. How are we supposed to negotiate if negotiations can turn into an armed attack in a matter of moments?
The shutdown of Gaza, again, certainly something that there's going to be much focus on, especially when we're looking at, the escalation of what we're seeing taking place around the world.
Yeah, I think there was a link certainly in some of the justifications to the relationship between Hamas and Iran as one of the sort of political, I can't call them legal, but political justifications for the attack. But more immediately, what's happened in the wake of the attack is that Israel has shut down access, has closed the entry of humanitarian supplies into Gaza. They've paused the rotation of humanitarian personnel, which means that the various measures that were being implemented are long overdue and long since ordered by the International Court of Justice to provide life-saving aid to the people of Gaza have now been put on pause. And one would point out that this, again, is an international legal obligation. The orders by the International Court of Justice to provide that humanitarian aid are binding on Israel. You can't launch a war unlawfully and use that illegality to then stop fulfilling another obligation you have, which is to provide that relief to the people of Gaza pursuant to those court orders.
Prof, thank you very much for your time. We do appreciate it as we watch around the world how this is going to escalate. Professor Christopher Gevers, who's an associate professor, School of Law, director at the Center for Applied Legal Studies. We do appreciate your time